On June 6, 2001, 3-year-old Luis Angel Sanchez was reportedly inside room 26 of a small motel in Tracy, California. He was staying there with his mother and her former boyfriend. After that day, no one outside that room is known to have seen Luis alive again.
But there was no immediate missing child alert, no urgent public search, no photographs appearing across television screens. In fact, more than a year would pass before Luis was finally reported missing. By the time investigators learned that the 3-year-old had vanished, the motel room had been occupied by countless other guests. Memories had faded, and any place where Luis might have been hidden had been exposed to more than a year of changing weather.
Yet police soon came to believe that the 2 adults who had been with Luis knew exactly what had happened. One of them would admit to helping dispose of his remains. The other would eventually accept responsibility for causing his death. But despite arrests, guilty pleas, and a large-scale search, Luis has never been found. So how could a 3-year-old disappear and remain unreported for more than 12 months? And after all these years, where is Luis Angel Sanchez? Before we begin, this story concerns the suspected death of a young child. The purpose of this video is not to sensationalize what may have happened to Luis. It is to preserve his name, examine the documented facts, and focus attention on the question that remains unanswered: the location of his remains.
Some parts of this case are firmly established through missing person records and the resulting criminal proceedings. Other important details were never made public. Where the evidence is incomplete, we will not invent an answer. Luis Angel Sanchez was born on October 21, 1997. By the summer of 2001, he was 3 years old. Public records describe him as approximately 3 feet 4 inches tall and weighing around 40 pounds. He had brown hair and brown eyes.
Today, Luis remains listed in the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System under case number MP26490. His official date of last contact is June 6, 2001, in Tracy, California. But Luis's case is different from many missing child investigations. Authorities do not believe he wandered away.
They do not believe he was abducted by a stranger. Investigators concluded that Luis was killed by someone who was supposed to care for him, and the first major obstacle in finding the truth was the extraordinary amount of time that passed before anyone contacted police.
Public reporting tells us very little about Luis's personality. There are no widely published stories about his favorite food, the toys he carried, or the things that made him laugh. That absence is important. In many cases involving missing children, the public learns almost everything about the victim. Family photographs are distributed, relatives describe the child's personality, and communities organize searches. Luis never received that immediate attention.
The available record reduces much of his short life to a few physical measurements, a photograph, and the date he vanished. But Luis was more than a case number. He was a 3-year-old child who depended completely on the adults around him.
At that age, a child cannot independently contact police. He cannot explain to distant relatives that he is in danger. He cannot choose to leave an unsafe environment. If the adults responsible for him stop talking about him, a young child can become almost invisible.
That appears to be what happened to Luis. At the time of his disappearance, he was living with his mother, Catherine Elizabeth Sanchez, also identified in public accounts by the nickname Kitty, and her former boyfriend, William Christopher Crumlinde.
The 3 were reportedly staying at the Hacienda Inn, a motel in the 600 block of West 11th Street in Tracy. Investigators believe Luis was inside room 26 on June 6, 2001. That room became the last publicly documented location connected to his life.
A motel room is a temporary place. Guests arrive, sleep, leave, and are quickly replaced. Rooms are cleaned, bedding is removed, surfaces are wiped down, furniture may be repaired or replaced. That normal turnover would later become a serious problem. Whatever happened to Luis was not investigated immediately. There was no crime scene secured on June 6. No forensic team examined room 26 while potential evidence was still fresh. No investigators interviewed nearby guests while the events were recent in their minds. Instead, daily life at the motel continued, and with every passing day, the possibility of reconstructing what happened inside the room became more difficult.
Authorities would eventually allege that Crumlinda killed Luis in the motel room. Publicly available summaries do not provide a complete, verified account of the exact sequence of events, and they do not clearly establish every injury or action that occurred.
What is documented is that investigators concluded Luis had been the victim of a homicide. They also believed that after his death, his body was removed from the motel and buried in a field outside the immediate area.
But on June 6, 2001, police did not know any of that. As far as the outside world was concerned, Luis had simply stopped appearing. The most important question then becomes, what explanation was given when people began asking where he was?
According to the public case summary, witnesses later said Catherine told people that Luis was living with his grandmother. It was a simple explanation. It was also an explanation that could discourage further questions. A child staying with a relative is not unusual. Families change living arrangements.
Grandparents care for young children. Someone hearing that explanation casually may have had no immediate reason to suspect a crime. But Luis's grandmother reportedly had not seen him since June 2001. She spoke with Catherine only sporadically, and apparently did not have Luis in her care.
That created a disturbing separation between what some people had allegedly been told and what was actually happening. Luis was not with his grandmother. He was not known to be attending school or daycare somewhere else. There is no verified indication that he was living safely with another relative. He had vanished. Still, the disappearance was not reported to law enforcement during the summer of 2001. Weeks passed, then months. His fourth birthday came on October 21, 2001. There is no public indication that anyone outside the central circle saw him celebrate it. The year ended. Then 2002 began, and Luis was still not the subject of an active missing person investigation.
In a missing child case, the earliest hours are often the most important. Investigators attempt to establish where the child was last seen, who had access to the child, and what vehicles left the area. They search nearby roads, waterways, buildings, and open land. They preserve surveillance footage where it exists. They speak to witnesses before memories begin changing. Luis lost not only those first hours, but more than an entire year. During that time, the landscape around Tracy changed with the seasons. Grass grew and died. Rain and wind altered exposed ground. Vehicles traveled along rural roads. Agricultural work continued. People moved away or forgot details that might once have seemed insignificant. Any object left outside could have been buried, scattered, damaged, or removed. And because no missing person investigation was underway, no one knew which locations needed protection. The delay also meant investigators had to reconstruct a timeline based largely on statements made long after the suspected crime. They would have to determine who last saw Luis, when that sighting occurred, and whether anyone had helped conceal what happened. But the delay raises another difficult question. How does a 3-year-old remain unseen for more than a year without authorities being notified? Public sources say family members eventually reported Luis missing in July 2002. They do not clearly explain why the report took so long. That unanswered question remains one of the most unsettling elements of the case. When police finally became aware of Luis's disappearance, they were not dealing with an ordinary case of a child who had recently wandered away. The circumstances immediately demanded answers. Where had Luis been living?
Who had last seen him? Why had no one produced the child for more than a year? And why had people reportedly been told that he was staying with his grandmother when she had not seen him since June 2001?
Investigators focused on the 2 adults believed to have been with Luis at the Hacienda Inn, Catherine Sanchez and William Crumlinde. At the time of their arrests, Catherine was reportedly living in Manteca, while Crumlinde was living in Hayward. Whatever relationship existed between them in June 2001 had changed, but the disappearance of Luis connected them. The investigation appears to have moved rapidly once police began questioning the adults involved. On July 22, 2002, authorities charged Crumlinde with Luis's murder. Catherine initially faced charges connected to child abuse or endangerment. Both were also accused of the unlawful disposal of human remains. Investigators believed Crumlinde had killed Luis, and that Catherine had helped him remove and bury the child's body. After more than a year of silence, the case had suddenly transformed. Luis was no longer being treated only as a missing child. Police were investigating a homicide without a body. According to the available case summary, Catherine told investigators that she had been intoxicated around the time Luis's body was disposed of. She reportedly claimed she could not remember the precise burial location. That explanation created a devastating problem. Investigators now had information suggesting Luis had been buried somewhere outside Tracy. But knowing that a body may be in a rural area is very different from knowing exactly where to search. A person driving through open country may pass hundreds of possible locations in only a few minutes. Fields can look nearly identical. Canals, service roads, fences, and patches of vegetation may change over time. A burial site chosen at night could be especially difficult to relocate more than a year later. Investigators reportedly narrowed their attention to an area near the Delta Mendota Canal and south of Tracy Municipal Airport. The available public descriptions of the exact geography are limited, but the search area included open land where locating a small, concealed grave would be extremely difficult. Authorities now faced a race against evidence that had already been exposed to the environment for more than 12 months, and they were relying on information from someone who claimed she could not identify the exact spot. In August 2002, investigators searched the area where they believed Luis might have been buried. Imagine the scale of that task. Luis was only 3 years old. Any grave prepared for a child could have been relatively small. After a year, disturbed soil may no longer have been obvious. Vegetation could have returned. Agricultural activity or animals could have altered the site. Search teams examined the land hoping to locate something: clothing, personal property, disturbed ground, or human remains. During the operation, bone fragments were reportedly discovered. For a moment, those fragments may have appeared to be the breakthrough the case needed. If they belonged to Luis, investigators could finally return him to his family and potentially establish forensic evidence about how he died.
But testing determined the fragments were not connected to Luis. The search continued for a time, but without a more precise location, authorities eventually stopped. Officials reportedly indicated that another search would require more specific information.
The land had not provided an answer. Luis was still missing, And although investigators believed they knew who was responsible, they would have to pursue the criminal case without recovering his body.
Cases without a recovered body present unique challenges. A body can establish identity, cause of death, approximate time of death, and the nature of the injuries. It can contain physical evidence linking the victim to a location or suspect. Without remains, prosecutors must rely more heavily on witness statements, admissions, behavioral evidence, and the circumstances surrounding the victim's disappearance. The defense may argue that the person could still be alive. For a child as young as Luis, however, the known circumstances made a voluntary disappearance impossible. He could not have created a new identity. He could not have traveled alone. He could not have independently remained hidden for more than a year.
Authorities evidently believed the statements and evidence were strong enough to pursue serious criminal charges. But criminal cases frequently change, as prosecutors evaluate which charges can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Krumlinde had initially been charged with murder. The case would ultimately end with a different conviction, and the difference between the original accusation and the final plea leaves important details about Luis's final hours outside the public record.
Cases without a recovered body present unique challenges. A body can establish identity, cause of death, approximate time of death, and the nature of the injuries. It can contain physical evidence linking the victim to a location or suspect. Without remains, prosecutors must rely more heavily on witness statements, admissions, behavioral evidence, and the circumstances surrounding the victim's disappearance. The defense may argue that the person could still be alive. For a child as young as Luis, however, the known circumstances made a voluntary disappearance impossible. He could not have created a new identity. He could not have traveled alone. He could not have independently remained hidden for more than a year.
Authorities evidently believed the statements and evidence were strong enough to pursue serious criminal charges. But criminal cases frequently change, as prosecutors evaluate which charges can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Krumlinde had initially been charged with murder. The case would ultimately end with a different conviction, and the difference between the original accusation and the final plea leaves important details about Luis's final hours outside the public record. Catherine Sanchez eventually pleaded guilty to being an accessory to murder. As part of the case, she admitted helping Krumlinde dispose of Luis's remains after the child was killed. William Krumlinde pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and causing great bodily injury to a child. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison. The pleas established legal responsibility. Krumlinde accepted criminal responsibility for causing Luis's death. Catherine accepted responsibility for helping conceal what happened afterward. But the court proceedings did not answer every question. The publicly available record does not explain in detail what triggered the violence against Luis. It does not provide a complete minute-by-minute account of what happened in room 26.
And most importantly, the pleas did not reveal a burial location precise enough to recover him. There was punishment. There was an acknowledgement that Luis had been killed, but there was no homecoming, no funeral built around recovered remains, no confirmed grave where those who remembered him could visit. The adults connected to the case moved through the justice system. Luis remained in the ground somewhere unknown.
More than 2 decades later, several major questions remain unresolved. First, what exactly happened inside room 26 on June 6, 2001? Investigators reached the conclusion that Luis was killed, and Krumlinde later pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter.
But the complete circumstances have not been widely documented. Second, When and how was Luis removed from the motel? Was he carried directly from the room to a vehicle? Did anyone see Catherine and Crumlinde leave? Were there motel guests or employees who noticed something unusual but did not understand its importance until much later? Third, why was Luis not reported missing for more than a year? Public sources say family members made the report in July 2002, but the reason for the delay remains unclear. Were relatives repeatedly reassured that he was safe? Did they believe the claim that he was with his grandmother? When did someone first realize that no trustworthy person could confirm Luis was alive? Fourth, who else may have known that Luis was gone? Maintaining a false explanation for more than a year often requires either isolation or the confidence that no one will closely investigate. And finally, where was Luis buried? This is the question that still prevents the case from reaching a true conclusion. Someone may remember a rural location, a road, a canal crossing, a fence, or a place where a vehicle stopped. A detail that appeared meaningless in 2001 could now be the information needed to find him.